So I'm John Berndt, 55. I grew up in Azusa, California. My mom describes having these three small brown-haired, brown-eyed kids, and then I came out and I was just this big 10-pound blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby that just didn't look like I fit with the family. Back then, it was 3-hour Sunday meeting. Monday night was lessons at home, like read the Bible and the Book of Mormon and do little lessons around that as a family. Tuesday night was like youth study. They called it primary. And then throughout the week, imagine being a teenager having to get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning to make a 7 o'clock church class before going to school, before going to high school. I don't remember a single person who liked doing that. Church was our life. My dad had a 1952 convertible MG. Back in those days, all 7 of us would sit in that car. And after church, we would go to a local park and we would play as a family on Sunday there. But we also were a family that didn't do any activities on Sunday. Aside from that kind of family thing, we couldn't play on Sunday. We couldn't go outside on Sunday. Couldn't work on Sunday. My earliest kinds of ideas or feelings about being different were my siblings. And so my brother, he always called me fag and gay, and the same kinds of things happened at school to me. In high school, I got asked to go to like prom and to dances, and I would ask girls to go to prom and to dances, and I never did any kind of dating, never asked a girl out to go on a date. I had a few phone calls with girls, but that was about it. Like nothing like that, honestly. Toward the end of my high school, I started working at Sears and I met a really great friend named Star. And she started taking me to LA and to clubs. And so I had this whole other thing that I was starting to do as a teenager in high school that nobody really knew about. But I was still a teenager. I was still in high school. And so I had to get a fake ID. I asked my brother if I could use his driver's license, and he said no. And so I just waited about a week later, and I just stole his driver's license from him. And he never put it together. And I remember my friends Star and Richard and Wendy, the three of them, would grill me in the car on the way to the clubs, grill me like when my birthday was, when I would have graduated high school, and stuff like that, so that if I were stopped at the door, I could answer these questions. And we would go to places like Arena and Rage and underground places. Rage was a gay club in West Hollywood. I think that's where I saw two men kiss the first time. And that's really where I started to put together, oh, the things that make me different is that. That's what I am. I'm that. And at this stage, I was already, sexually active with myself. So it was pretty clear what I was gravitating toward, in my fantasies and things like that it didn't include women at all. And so I started to really put those things together as a teenager in that way. But this was all done here. It wasn't done out with anyone else. It wasn't done through experiences with anyone else. It was all here. And I started to make sense around it that way. So even like in high school, I was living, it really felt like I was living a double life in a way, because I was doing all this clubbing with my friends. And then I would go to church on Sunday and be like, a good Mormon kid throughout the week. After high school, it was assumed that I would go on a mission for the church because that's what everyone did, even though it was presented as, oh, this is your choice, It's like, no, it's not. I ended up leaving for my mission in April of when I was 19. So less than a year. During that year, I had sex with a man. It was tearing me up that I was about to do this and I had done that. And so my two kind of like double life idea, my two worlds were kind of like really starting to crash together. And I lied in the interviews because I knew that had I said something about it, they probably wouldn't let me go. And then as I got my call to Johannesburg, South Africa, and I had in the back of my mind, I don't know if I really should go because I'm going this direction and I've done these things that I've lied about. And I remember specifically thinking, this'll go away. I'll come out the other side and I'll marry a woman like I'm supposed to, and I'll have children, and everything will be fine, and I'll just forget all this. And that's what it felt like for me. And I remember having one kind of big interview with someone who's in charge of the bishop. And in that interview, I revealed a little bit of what I'd done. And I remember making it sound like I'd done less than what I actually had done, to just alleviate some of the turmoil I was having. So there was a time right then that they weren't sure if they were going to let me go to South Africa. And then it was determined that I could go, that I'd shown enough repentance, I guess, and everyone was relieved. Nobody knew this except for me, this guy, and my parents, I think. So I went to South Africa, and that was a 2-year mission. I mean, I laugh about it now, but it wasn't funny then. It was not funny then. There was no way I could not go on a mission. No way. I was there to be on a mission for 2 years. I walked the streets and knocked on people's doors repeatedly and told them about Jesus, and they would slam the doors in my face, and I would get on a bike and ride to people's houses, the whole thing. I did the whole thing. There were some things that started to creep in, largely about the guys I was put with as a companion, because you're put with another missionary. You always see them in twos, and that's a rule. Like, you always have to be with another person that you're put with, and they rotate. So I wasn't always with the same person, but I was with another missionary, right? And I remember, like, the last 2 or so, I started to have some very similar feelings that I'd had before. I thought, oh, this didn't really work. This guy's hot. I need to be careful. I came home with an honorable mission. And also during that time in Africa, there were a few of the guys there who got sent home because they were inappropriate, largely around women. And I didn't want that to happen, because that's worse than not going, right? I fulfilled it. I was immediately confused coming home. These feelings were roaring right back up in me, and I had done what I was supposed to do to not have that happen. I started to not want to wear the sacred garments. That was a struggle. I don't think people realize or recognize the idea that I had made promises to myself and to God and to my family and to my religion that I was breaking. At that point, when I came back from my mission, there's a big, strong push to get you married, right? And so they put me into what they called a singles ward, which was made up of all single adults. And it was really meant to kind of like, that's probably where you'd find your wife or husband, right? And I remember being in that singles ward and feeling again like, I'm not interested in women. The bishop of the singles ward asked me if I would be the Sunday school president. God wants you to do this, right? And nobody says no to those things. And so I had a meeting with him and said, I have same-sex attraction. This is something I don't want, but it's with me, like that kind of thing. And he said that he would still allow me to be the Sunday school president. I became the Sunday school president, which I don't know how. I mean, I know how that happened, but I don't know how that happened. It was shortly after that I decided to stop trying to make that work and be a Mormon. And at this point, I was also trying to figure out how to get out of the home and live on my own. And I did. And I got an apartment in Pasadena. And I moved into my first apartment in Pasadena and never went to church. The first Sunday I didn't go. And the second Sunday I didn't go. And I just stopped going. Making that decision as an adult and deciding I'm going to go this way rather than this way was really excruciating for me. It was hard to do. But it felt like I was following my truth and following who I really felt like I was and who I was becoming and who I always was. And so that just led to more. And then I met my first boyfriend, Sheldon. So at this point, I'd already come out to my family and I'd told them, I remember, because I was living away from home, Yeah, I think for me with Sheldon in particular, I guess think of it as the purpose that relationship served for me, which is kind of the way I think about it, was literally allowing me to have a first relationship with a man. And it really was my first love experience. My first, I loved him, and I was all in. It ended because I found out that he was having sex with literally everybody. I was really betrayed and devastated in a lot of ways, like a young first love person would be. I felt like, looking back, it was totally normal in a lot of ways. I had to move back home. And so I had to go back to my mother and my father and tell them what had happened and tell them I needed a place to stay. At that point, I remember my mother being particularly tender and kind to me. And I remember telling her about some of the depths of the, heartbreak that I was experiencing, and her being very, very tender and gentle with me about that. That was really the first time from her in relation to me being gay that I felt like she loved me anyway, which from my father, I got the moment I told him. From her, it took all that to then get to the place where I felt that from her. I don't doubt that she didn't feel that way, but it just wasn't really conveyed to me until then. At the same time, they were also housing missionaries, because that's how it worked in the church, is that members of the church would have missionaries live with them. And they wanted to do this for extra income because the church would pay them for that. And I remember overhearing my mother talking to my dad and saying, well, we can't really have him here if we're going to have them here. So it was clear to me I need to move. I really focused on, rather than it being like, oh, I can't live there because I'm gay, it was really more, I can't live here because I'm stopping them from getting extra income, and that doesn't feel right.
Financial.
Yeah, and I need to move on. I'd been there, I think, for a year. And so I decided to look for another place, and I packed up and moved out to my other apartment, and really settled into living single and living alone as a gay man in Los Angeles. It feels to me like I just did a day-to-day, week-to-week work, school, try to meet guys, meet a few, go home, have sex. It was awful. Sometimes it was great. Some of those led to a few months of relationship, and then they would peter out, and I'd start the cycle all over again. I was really determined to become a therapist. Even though I was working full-time for the city of West Hollywood, it was never my first choice. And so this whole kind of time, I was trying to work and pursuing relationships that never seemed to work, pursuing my degree so that I could become a therapist that just felt like never ending. All of these things felt like just hamster wheel for me. With it kind of grinding on to where nothing was really happening, it felt more and more like, well, I didn't go that way, and that's the happiness route from the Mormon church. And I went my way, and nothing's happening. This is dismal also. So I finished up my schooling. I got my master's degree. I was thrilled. I could now start on training to become a therapist and starting to get the 3,000 hours I needed. And 2 weeks after my graduation, I met Jeff. Everything changed. Next week will be our 15-year anniversary. The years have just kind of gone by and gotten better and better. Jeff and I have built a life together. We bought a house all within less than a year. We did all this. Felt like, oh, finally these things are happening that the Mormons told me should have happened a long time ago with a woman 20 years before, right? He immediately accepted me for exactly who I was. There was no sense or feeling that I needed to be a different person to be with him. I finally felt like I was being a real, authentic human being in the world. And this man wanted me to do that and connected with me in that way. And that was new.